My name's Evan. I'm 32, and I've always been the responsible one in my family. It wasn't a role I chose, but it was one I grew into by necessity. While my brother Mark, 2 years older than me, drifted through jobs and leaned on excuses, I was the one who quietly picked up the pieces. Growing up, our parents treated him like he could do no wrong. He was the golden child, the one with potential. Meanwhile, I was the steady one, the dependable one, the one expected to be there when his potential crashed into yet another brick wall. By the time I hit my 30s, I had carved out a stable life for myself. I worked long hours, managed my finances carefully, and built a small but solid business. Nothing flashy, but enough to pay my mortgage, keep a decent car in the driveway, and feel secure about the future. Mark, on the other hand, was drowning. He had a wife, 2 kids, and a pile of bad decisions trailing behind him. When he called me late one evening, his voice tight and desperate, I didn't even need to hear the details. I knew what was coming. "Evan, I'm in trouble," he started. "The credit cards, the loan, it's all catching up to me. They're threatening to take the car, the house, the kids can't." His voice broke. I don't know what to do." That knot of responsibility tightened in my stomach, the same one I'd felt since we were teenagers. I should have said no. I should have told him that he had to face the consequences of his choices. But the thought of his kids, my niece and nephew, losing their home gnawed at me. So I wired him the money. $15,000. Not a loan, not with interest, not even with conditions. Just a brother helping a brother. For a moment, it felt like the right thing to do. He called me afterward, voice shaky with gratitude. His wife sent me a long text thanking me for saving their family. I went to bed that night thinking maybe, finally, this would be the moment Mark turned things around. But that fragile hope didn't last long. A week later, at a family cookout, I overheard him talking to a couple of our cousins near the grill. He was laughing, actually laughing, as he told them, "Yeah, Evan helped out a little. 15 grand. I mean, it's nice, but you know how cheap he is. He could have done way more if he really wanted to." Guys always holding back. I froze where I stood, a plate in my hand going cold. My ears burned as I listened to him paint me as some kind of miser, like I'd tossed him pocket change instead of bailing him out of a mess that could have ruined his family. The cousins chuckled uncomfortably, probably unsure how to respond. Mark clapped one of them on the shoulder and added, "That's just Evan, though. Always acting like a big shot, but when it comes to family, stingy." I didn't confront him right there. I couldn't. My chest felt too tight, my jaw locked too hard. I just set the plate down and walked away, my mind spiraling. $15,000. That was more than half my savings. Money I'd been setting aside for a down payment on expanding my business. And he dared to call me cheap? That night, lying awake in bed, I replayed his words over and over. The gratitude I'd felt, the relief of thinking I'd done something meaningful, it all curdled into anger. I thought about the way he'd leaned on me my whole life, how he never once had to face the fallout of his own decisions because someone, usually me, was always there to soften the blow. And now he was mocking me for it? No. This time, something had to change. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about respect, about boundaries, about finally teaching Mark a lesson he couldn't laugh his way out of. And that's when the idea started forming, one I knew he'd never see coming. In the days after that cookout, I tried to let it go. I told myself maybe I misheard him. Maybe he was joking and I took it too seriously. But the truth is, once someone plants a seed like that in your head, you start noticing every little thing they do. And with Mark, there was plenty to notice. The first sign came a few days later when my mom called. Her tone was soft, that careful voice she only used when she was trying to coax me into something. "Evan, honey, I just wanted to say thank you for helping your brother. You've always been so reliable." I could have stopped her there, but I waited. Then she added, "But you know, 15,000 doesn't really go very far with the kind of debt they had. He's still under so much pressure. Maybe you could do just a little more." I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Not only had Mark painted me as cheap, but now he had dragged our parents into it. It was the same pattern from when we were kids. Mark makes a mess, I fix it, and then somehow he convinces everyone that what I did wasn't enough. I didn't commit to anything on that call. I just muttered something about needing to think and hung up, but the bitterness in my chest was already boiling. A few days later, I stopped by our parents' house to drop something off. Mark happened to be there, lounging on the couch like he owned the place. His wife was in the kitchen with Mom, and I overheard her say, "Honestly, if Evan really cared, he'd make sure the kids never have to worry again. What's 15,000 to someone like him?" My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Someone like him. What did that even mean? I wasn't rich. I wasn't sitting on millions. I worked 60 hours a week to build what I had, and somehow, in their eyes, I was hoarding it. Mark must have seen me standing there, because he grinned and said, "Hey, don't look so serious, little brother. We're just saying, it wouldn't kill you to spread the wealth a bit more. Family first, right?" Something snapped in me right then. The way he said it wasn't a plea. It was an expectation, almost a demand, like I was some kind of walking bank account that owed him and his family whatever he asked for. The following weekend, we had another family gathering, this time at my parents' house for Dad's birthday. I brought a thoughtful gift, something Dad had mentioned wanting months ago, and I felt good about it. But when I handed it to him, Mark smirked and said loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Wow, Evan, you sure you don't want to just write a check instead? That's what you're best at." Laughter rippled around the table, even though most of it was nervous. My dad gave me a look, like he wanted to tell Mark to cut it out, but he didn't. He never did. Mark had always been allowed to poke, to jab, to humiliate. And now, at 34, he was still getting away with it. Later that night, when everyone was cleaning up, Mark cornered me in the hallway. His tone was lower now, almost conspiratorial. "Listen, Evan, the 15 grand helped, but it didn't really scratch the surface. I was thinking, maybe you could float me another 20. You know, just until things settle. It's not like you can't afford it." That last sentence stung more than anything. Not like I couldn't afford it. Did he have any idea how hard I worked? How many nights I came home exhausted just to fall asleep on the couch before dragging myself up to do it all over again? I stared at him for a long time before answering. "Mark, I'm not giving you another cent." He blinked, then laughed like I'd told the funniest joke of the night. "Sure you are. You'll come around. You always do." And that was the moment I realized just how deep his entitlement ran. He didn't just expect my help. He believed it was his right. The next few weeks only made it worse. I started hearing from cousins and even a couple of family friends that Mark had been talking. He was telling anyone who would listen that I was hoarding money, that I only gave him a fraction of what I really had, that I was letting his kids suffer while I lived comfortably. Each rumor cut deeper than the last, not just because they weren't true, but because they were reshaping how my own family saw me. The dependable one, the responsible one, the one who always helped. Now, I was being painted as selfish. And the more I stewed on it, the more one thing became clear. If I didn't stop this cycle now, it would never end. Mark had always needed saving. But this time, I was done playing the savior. This time, he was going to learn what it felt like when the safety net was pulled away. I wish I could say things cooled down after that, but in truth, they only escalated. The whispers from relatives became louder, the sideways glances at family gatherings sharper. I noticed the way people's tones shifted when they spoke to me, half polite, half judgmental, as though they had all quietly agreed that I was hoarding my blessings instead of sharing them. It all came to a head one Saturday afternoon when my parents invited me over for what they called a family lunch. I walked in expecting a casual meal, but the moment I stepped through the door, the air felt heavy. Everyone was already seated, my parents, Mark and his wife, even a couple of aunts and uncles. My gut told me something was wrong before a word was spoken. Mom cleared her throat nervously. "Evan, we need to talk about Mark's situation." I sat down slowly, eyeing my brother, who leaned back in his chair with a smug sort of calm. It was the posture of someone who knew he had backup. Dad jumped in. "He's still struggling, son. The 15,000 helped, but there's more to pay. And, well, Mark's been telling us you've been doing very well for yourself. We think it's only fair you step up again." My chest tightened. Fair? I already gave him more than I should have. That was my savings, Dad. I don't have unlimited funds. Mark rolled his eyes. "Come on, Evan. Don't play the victim. You've got a nice house, a business that's thriving, a new car. What's another 20 or 30 grand to you? You'll make it back." I stared at him, disbelief mixing with rage. "Do you even hear yourself? You're asking me to drain myself for your mistakes, again. Do you know how hard I worked for that money? Do you have any idea what I had to sacrifice to save it?" His wife spoke up, her voice laced with venom. "Oh, please, Evan. You don't have kids. You don't have mouths to feed. What good is all that money sitting in an account when your family is suffering? You're being selfish." That word again. Selfish. It hit me like a hammer each time. But what happened next took everything to a level I didn't think was possible. Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table toward me, and when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It was a loan application with my name typed neatly on it. My signature was forged at the bottom. I looked up in shock. "What is this?" Mark shrugged, as if it were nothing. "Relax. It's just paperwork. I figured you'd help eventually, so I went ahead and got things moving. It's only a $30,000 loan. You'll hardly notice." The room spun. My own brother had forged my name on a loan, put me on the hook for his debt without even asking. My hands shook as I crumpled the paper. "You forged my signature? Are you insane?" Mom gasped, but Dad just looked weary, like he was caught between us. "Mark, that's going too far." But Mark wasn't fazed. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with arrogance. "It's already done, Evan. You can either make a scene about it, or you can step up like a real brother and cover it. Either way, the bank's going to come knocking." That was the moment something inside me snapped. All those years of playing the dependable one, all the times I picked up after his failures, all the sacrifices I made to protect his image, it all collapsed under the weight of that single betrayal. I looked around the table, expecting someone, anyone, to back me up. But all I saw were downcast eyes, nervous shuffles, and an unspoken expectation that I would give in, like I always did. And that's when it hit me. They didn't just expect me to save Mark. They had built their entire idea of family on the assumption that I always would. My voice came out cold, steady, sharper than I'd ever spoken before. "You think I'm cheap? You think I'm selfish? You think you can forge my name and I'll just roll over? You have no idea what you've just done." Mark smirked, still convinced I'd fold. "Sure, Evan. Keep talking." But what he didn't realize was that he'd finally crossed the one line I could never forgive. And in that moment, I knew exactly what had to be done. After that confrontation at the table, I walked out of my parents' house without another word. My hands were still shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, the forged loan application stuffed in my pocket like a burning coal. I remember sitting there in my car, staring out at the street, trying to process what had just happened. My own brother had committed fraud in my name. My parents had sat there, watching, almost as if they were waiting for me to accept it. And worst of all, no one stopped him. The days that followed felt like I was living under a heavy fog. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, afraid it was the bank calling to confirm the loan. At work, I found myself distracted, running through worst-case scenarios. What if this loan really went through? What if my credit got ruined? What if Mark defaulted and the collectors came after me? At night, I barely slept. I lay awake replaying his smug expression, his certainty that I would cave because I always had. The bitterness inside me churned until it became something darker, something heavier. I tried to talk to my parents, hoping maybe I had misunderstood their silence. I stopped by one evening after work and found them in the living room. Mom barely looked up from her knitting when I mentioned the forgery. "Mark didn't mean harm," she said softly, like it excused everything. "He's desperate. His kids need stability. And I don't." I snapped. "My life doesn't matter?" Dad sighed, rubbing his temples. "Evan, you're strong. You'll be fine. Your brother, he's not like you. He can't handle this alone." That sentence hit me harder than any punch. He can't handle this alone. So, what? I was supposed to carry him forever? I walked out that night feeling more isolated than I ever had before. It wasn't just Mark against me now. It felt like the whole family had decided I was the designated safety net, the one who could never say no. The breaking point came a week later when I got a call from my aunt. She'd heard from Mark that I was dragging my feet on helping him again. "Evan," she said gently, "we all know you're comfortable. It's just money. Why let your pride stand in the way of family?" I hung up on her mid-sentence. That was the moment I realized. No one was going to defend me. No one was going to call out Mark for what he had done. As far as they were concerned, I was the selfish one for not sacrificing more. So I stopped trying to explain myself. I stopped defending my choices. On the surface, I grew quiet. I kept my conversations short. I gave short, polite smiles at family gatherings. But inside, something was shifting. I started pulling away from everyone, limiting visits, ignoring calls, screening texts. At work, I poured myself into my business, staying late, burying the anger in productivity. But behind the scenes, I began collecting information. Quietly, methodically. I went through my financial accounts line by line, making sure nothing else had been tampered with. I reached out to the bank directly, inquiring about the forged loan, and flagged my records for fraud protection. I started documenting everything, every message, every rumor that made its way back to me, every careless comment Mark had made about my stinginess. At first, it felt paranoid. But the more I gathered, the more I realized this wasn't paranoia, it was preparation. Because if Mark thought he could forge my name, spread lies about me, and humiliate me without consequence, he was about to learn how wrong he was. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to Mark's chaos. I was planning, patiently, quietly, and deep down, I knew the day was coming when I would pull the rug out from under him in a way he couldn't laugh off, couldn't talk his way out of, couldn't twist to make me the villain. The storm was already forming, and all I had to do was wait for the right moment to let it break. The weeks turned into months, and while my family still whispered about me being selfish, I found myself caring less and less. Distance gave me perspective. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't rushing to clean up Mark's messes. I wasn't answering his calls at midnight. I wasn't transferring money with my stomach in knots. Instead, I was channeling all that energy into myself. My business, which had always been stable but modest, began to grow. Without my savings being drained, I was finally able to invest in expansion, new equipment, better staff, more clients. I started seeing real returns, and with them, a sense of freedom I hadn't realized I was missing. By the end of that year, my income had nearly doubled. I upgraded my office space, hired 2 new employees, and for the first time, I felt like the life I'd been working toward was finally taking shape. It wasn't just work, either. I began taking care of myself in ways I had neglected. I joined a gym, lost some weight, and felt stronger both physically and mentally. I started traveling, short trips at first, then longer ones. Cities I had only dreamed about visiting became places I actually set foot in. I posted pictures on social media. Me standing in front of the Eiffel Tower, me kayaking on a crystal blue lake in Croatia, me shaking hands with new business partners at a conference in Berlin. And that's when I noticed something interesting. The more my life flourished, the more desperate Mark seemed to become. I'd still get the occasional message from him, sometimes begging, sometimes mocking. "Nice trip," he once texted me after I shared a photo. "Shame you couldn't put that money toward helping family instead." Another time he wrote, "Don't forget who's really struggling here. Those pictures won't keep you warm when you're old and alone." I didn't respond. Silence had become my greatest weapon. But behind the scenes, I kept building. I strengthened my finances, diversified my income streams, and quietly made connections that boosted my reputation. I even started mentoring younger entrepreneurs, and one of them joked, "You're like the older brother I never had." That line stung in a bittersweet way because I realized I was giving more guidance to strangers than I had ever been able to give Mark. But unlike him, they actually listened. Family gatherings became rare for me, but when I did show up, the difference was obvious. I'd arrive in a sharp suit, driving a newer car, carrying myself with a confidence I never used to have. My relatives would murmur about how well I was doing, but there was always an undertone of suspicion, like success itself was selfish. Mark, on the other hand, looked worse each time. His clothes more worn, his temper shorter, his excuses growing thinner. Once, I caught him glancing at my watch, a gift I'd bought myself after hitting a big milestone, and I could practically see the envy burning in his eyes. He still played the victim to anyone who would listen, insisting I had abandoned him. But the more he talked, the more people started noticing the cracks in his story. Some cousins even pulled me aside quietly and said, "Look, we get it now. He's always been that way." It wasn't full support, but it was a shift. For the first time, I wasn't the one sinking when Mark made mistakes. He was, and I was finally free enough to let him. But I wasn't just moving on. I was preparing. Every trip, every new success, every quiet move I made was a step closer to something bigger. Because I knew that sooner or later, Mark would make another desperate grab. And when he did, I wanted to be in a position not just to defend myself, but to turn it back on him. The rise wasn't just about escaping his shadow. It was about building a foundation so strong that when I finally struck back, it would shake his entire world. And that moment was getting closer by the day. It was around this time that a small but crucial piece of information fell into my lap, something that turned my quiet resilience into a sharp-edged plan. One morning at the office, I was going over paperwork with my accountant. We were discussing tax deductions and future investments when he casually mentioned, "You know, it's a good idea to keep your personal credit reports locked down. People sometimes try to open accounts in others' names. Identity theft is more common than you think." The words made my stomach twist. Identity theft. Forged signatures. Mark's smug face flashed in my mind. The memory of that fraudulent loan application still raw. I realized then that my brother's recklessness wasn't just about begging. It was about overstepping boundaries in ways that could ruin me if I wasn't careful. So I took action. I froze my credit. I added layers of fraud protection. I contacted a lawyer, someone I trusted from a business seminar, and laid out the situation without naming names at first. When I finally revealed it was my brother, she didn't even flinch. "Family or not," she said, "this is criminal. If he tries again, you'll have leverage." Leverage. That word stuck in my mind like a spark in dry wood. I started thinking differently after that meeting. Up until then, my approach had been reactive. I'd defend myself, pull away, build my life stronger. But now I saw the possibility of going on the offensive, not out of spite, but to finally make Mark understand there were consequences to his actions. The next turning point came at a family barbecue a few weeks later. I hadn't planned to go, but my dad's voice on the phone had carried a weariness I couldn't ignore. When I arrived, I noticed Mark sitting alone at a table, nursing a drink. His wife was inside talking loudly, and the kids were running around barefoot on the grass. I tried to keep to myself, but eventually, Mark wandered over, his grin already halfway to arrogance. "Evan," he said, clapping me on the shoulder like we were best friends. "Heard your business is doing even better now. Guess you've got more room to help family out, huh?" I gave him nothing but a neutral smile. But later, I overheard him talking to an uncle about a new opportunity he was pursuing. He was vague, but I caught enough. He was trying to pitch a small side venture, something involving investment from the right people. My uncle looked uncomfortable, nodding politely, but clearly not convinced. That was when I realized Mark's desperation had shifted. He wasn't just asking for money anymore. He was trying to sell himself, to rope others in. If I could steer that impulse, if I could give him just enough rope, maybe he'd finally hang himself with it. Over the next month, I kept my ears open. I learned that Mark had already burned through favors from friends, even tried borrowing from extended family under the guise of short-term help. He was running out of options. And when people run out of options, they become careless. Meanwhile, I kept building my position. My lawyer helped me quietly update my will and trusts, making sure nothing tied to my name could be touched without my consent. I sat down with my bank manager and explained the situation, without naming Mark, of course, and set up alerts for any suspicious activity. On top of that, I started networking harder, forming connections in places Mark couldn't reach. Then one day, I got a call from a business contact who mentioned, almost in passing, that Mark had approached him. He said you two were working together on something. The man told me. Wanted me to invest. But I figured I'd check with you first. The blood drained from my face, but inside, something cold and certain settled. Mark wasn't just a leech. He was trying to use my name, my reputation, to prop himself up. That was his pattern. And that was the opening I needed. Because now, I wasn't just a brother he could manipulate. I was a businessman with resources, connections, and evidence. And if he wanted to keep pretending we were tied together, I was going to make sure those ties became chains. I didn't strike right away. I played it cool, confirming nothing, denying nothing, while quietly encouraging the idea that maybe, just maybe, Mark and I were still close. Let him lean into the lie. Let him believe he was clever. Because the deeper he dug, the more spectacular it would be when the ground vanished beneath him. The opportunity presented itself faster than I expected. Mark, in his usual reckless way, kept dropping hints about his new venture. He had no idea I already knew he was using my name to give himself credibility. He thought he was being slick, sprinkling my success into his pitch as though proximity to me made him trustworthy. One Thursday evening, my lawyer called me after reviewing some of the evidence I'd been collecting. If your brother is using your name to secure investments, Evan, that's fraud. At this point, you don't just have protection, you have ammunition. The key is to let him expose himself fully. Don't confront him too early. That advice stuck. So I waited, listening carefully, staying quiet. And then, at a cousin's birthday party, I overheard the exact slip I needed. Mark was in the corner, talking to two relatives who had done well for themselves. "Evan's already backing me on this," he boasted, his voice full of false confidence. "He just doesn't like to advertise it. But with him on board, you know it's solid." I didn't approach him. I didn't even let on that I had heard. Instead, I excused myself, stepped outside, and made a quick call to one of those relatives later that week. Calmly, politely, I set the record straight. "I'm not involved in anything Mark is pitching," I told them. "If he says otherwise, he's lying. And I'd advise against putting money into something that isn't documented properly." The relief in their voices told me everything. They had already been skeptical, but hadn't wanted to cause family drama. Now, with my quiet confirmation, they pulled out. Word spread quickly in those circles. But I wasn't finished. The next step was subtle. I had my lawyer draft a cease and desist letter, professionally worded, no emotion, just cold legal fact. It outlined the forgery attempt, the fraudulent use of my name, and the potential consequences if it continued. I didn't send it directly to Mark. Instead, I mailed it to him at his workplace, addressed in a way that his boss would almost certainly see. Sure enough, within days, the ripple effect reached me. Mark called, his voice shaking with fury. "What did you do? Do you know how humiliating it was to have my boss hand me that envelope? You're trying to ruin me." I didn't raise my voice. "No, Mark. You did that yourself. I just let people see it." He sputtered on the other end, but I hung up before he could spin another lie. From there, the dominoes fell one by one. Relatives who had once pressured me to help began distancing themselves from him. A couple of family friends who had been considering his pitch backed out entirely. Even my parents, who had defended him for so long, seemed shaken when they realized the depth of his deception. The best part? I never once had to shout, never had to make a scene. I let him hoist himself on his own rope, and all I did was tug at the knot. But it didn't stop there. A week later, I got another call, this time from the bank. Someone had attempted to open a line of credit in my name again. Because of the alerts I'd set up, it was flagged immediately. The representative told me calmly, "Don't worry, nothing went through. But if this keeps happening, we may need to escalate." I didn't need to ask who it was. Instead, I called my lawyer again, and we prepared the next step. Evidence was piling up, and if Mark kept pushing, he was going to find himself not just embarrassed, but cornered in a way he couldn't talk his way out of. By then, my life was soaring higher than ever. Business booming, health improving, reputation strong. And every step forward made the contrast with Mark's downfall sharper. He had always leaned on me like a crutch, and now that I'd stepped aside, he was collapsing under his own weight. And when the final piece clicked into place, when his desperate schemes left him nowhere to turn, I was ready to deliver the lesson he'd never forget. The last straw came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office finishing paperwork when my lawyer called, her tone sharper than usual. "Evan, it's official. Your brother tried to use your name again, this time to secure a private loan from a small lender. They reached out for verification, and because of the alerts you set up, we caught it immediately. We have enough evidence now to press charges if you want to." I sat back in my chair, staring at the raindrops sliding down the window. For years, I had been the one cleaning up after Mark, keeping the peace, protecting the family image. But now I had something I'd never had before, undeniable proof, neatly documented and ready to be used. For the first time, the power was entirely in my hands. I didn't rush to act. Instead, I called my parents over for dinner that weekend. When they arrived, they looked uneasy, probably expecting another confrontation. After we ate, I laid out the stack of documents on the table: the forged application, the cease and desist letter, the flagged credit attempt, even screenshots of Mark's messages. Mom's hands trembled as she flipped through the papers. Dad's face grew pale, his silence heavier than any words. "Finally," I said, "you've always asked me to protect him, to forgive him, to give him another chance. But here's the truth, he doesn't want help. He wants control, and I'm done being his safety net." They didn't argue. For once, they couldn't. The next day, I filed a formal complaint with the authorities. My lawyer assured me that with the evidence, it would be taken seriously. And it was. Within weeks, Mark's employer was notified. His reputation unraveled quickly. Clients backed away, friends stopped returning calls, and whispers of legal trouble followed him everywhere he went. The man who once strutted around family gatherings, mocking me in front of cousins and uncles, was suddenly very quiet. His wife stopped showing up to events altogether. The kids, innocent in all of this, were the only ones I felt sorry for, but there was nothing I could do without enabling Mark again. Then the calls began. At first, angry voicemails. You think you're better than me? You think you can destroy me? But as the weeks dragged on, the anger gave way to desperation. Please, Evan, just talk to me. Just make this go away. I can't do this alone. The irony wasn't lost on me. For decades, he had mocked me for being the responsible one. Now, the very trait he ridiculed was the thing he was begging to lean on. I never answered. At the next family gathering I attended, a cousin's wedding, Mark wasn't there. Whispers floated through the crowd about how he'd lost his job, how creditors were circling, how his marriage was on the rocks. When someone cautiously asked if I'd heard from him, I just smiled politely and said, "Not recently." And that was the truth. By then, I had blocked his number. Because in the end, revenge didn't come from shouting or gloating. It came from silence. From watching him finally face the consequences of a lifetime of choices without me there to soften the blow. The man who once laughed behind my back, calling me cheap, now sits alone, cut off by the very family who used to defend him. And I sleep peacefully, knowing that for the first time in my life, the balance is restored. My brother used to say I'd always come around, that I'd always cave. But he was wrong. The last message I ever listened to ended with his voice breaking as he whispered, "Evan, please, I need you." And for the first time, I didn't.